Hey everybody, welcome back to the Year I Made It podcast. My name is Madison and thank you guys so much for tuning in to a special episode of Mental Health Monday. This episode I am super excited about because I was able to have my therapist do an episode to share a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy, what she does as a CBT therapist, what mental health conditions can benefit, ways that I've benefited, and ways that I have just personally really enjoyed and grown from doing this sort of therapy in my life. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. I'm gonna link all of her information as far as her website and all of that in the show notes. So if you guys want to reach out to her, feel free. She is an awesome girly pop. So hope you guys enjoy this episode. Welcome back to the Year I Made It podcast. Today, I have a special episode of Mental Health Monday that I am excited to share with you guys. So I have Lauren with me, who is my super fabulous therapist who specializes in CBT. And so I wanted her to just kind of introduce herself, and then we're gonna go into a little bit about what CBT is, who can benefit, and what it can be used for.
Hi, thank you for having me. So, as Madison said, I'm Lauren. And I started off my training getting a master's in social work. And at that point in time, there was some emphasis on, what kind of theoretical orientation you most identify with. And so in terms of like what platform speaks out to you. And I kind of, explored some different options, but I did find myself naturally falling into what I think aligns with kind of a CBT mindset in terms of, okay, here's what's going on, now what can you do about it? Mm-hmm. And then fortuitously, I got a job in my first practice at the Center for Cognitive Behavior Therapy. And so my supervisor was, of course, a specialist in CBT. And so that kind of, it did feel like I was already on that trajectory, and I kind of fell into the space I was supposed to fall into. And so through his training, and just kind of more so confirmed that was an approach that I aligned with. And also I've found myself exploring that paradigm in ways that kind of make sense to me and my personality and my natural approach to working with clients.
I like that. So one thing that I do like about you and the way that you work with people is that you are very focused on, okay, this is happening, but then what can you do about it? How does it impact you? So do you think that kind of area of interest maybe kind of specifically got you into CBT, or maybe just kind of the way that you practice?
Yeah, absolutely, because it feels more directive. It's less of a, I'm sitting back and analyzing quietly what a client is doing, as it's a little more like hands-on, involved, like collaborative process. Mm-hmm. And it feels to me like in a world where a lot of people suffer from feeling a lack of control, that it's a way of taking control while also accepting what we don't have control over. Mm-hmm. So to me, it feels like an empowering approach to navigating any mental health issue.
I like that. So one thing that I wrote down, so I have like a little list of all the reasons that I love going to see Lauren and all the different things that she's helped me with. So I wrote down that I've been doing talk therapy on and off for probably most of my 20s, and I heard somebody one time refer to finding the right therapist as like speed dating. You have to like try out a bunch till you find somebody that like fits with what you're looking for and is like wanting to help you in the ways that you're looking for help. And so one thing that I really appreciate about Lauren is that I put down like she never like shoulds or shouldn't you. Like your approach is never, oh, this is the solution, or this is what you need to do, or this is what you should be doing, or like, oh, you did that, you shouldn't have done this, you should have done this instead. Your approach is very like helping people to make their own decisions, but in a way that empowers them to come up with a positive solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think no matter what theoretical orientation a person is practicing from, it has to be the client's right to self-determination, and it has to be something that they're wanting to do and are motivated to do, and that aligns with, where they're at that point in time. And so it doesn't get me or my clients anywhere to try and assert my own goals for them if that doesn't align with where they're at that point in time. And so it does require, I have to check myself and make sure I am like aligning with where the client is, while also having that balance of challenging the person to, towards that personal growth. So, yeah, and I also, with CBT, is very much based in these underlying schemas through which we kind of view the world and view our lives and approach life. And so it has to become, it has to come from within a person, and it takes a long time to restructure certain perspectives or core beliefs. And so pushing somebody too hard or too fast in a direction that maybe they're not ready to go in, those old patterns are gonna take charge.
That's very true. So what is one of the reasons that you wanted to go into this, or what kind of got you started in your interest maybe within people development and maybe the way the mind works?
Yeah, so I feel very lucky to have kind of naturally aligned with...
Ooh, that was unexpected.
I feel very lucky to have kind of naturally fallen into what I feel like is a fitting professional trajectory for myself. So growing, I just personality type, speaking from personality types, I've always been an intuitive person or empathetic person, always wondering how other people are feeling or wanting to like be there for people emotionally. And so there was just this kind of natural alignment there, and it's not like a totally altruistic thing. It's also selfishly, it's fulfilling for me and stimulating for me to connect to other people on those abstract levels of emotion. So there was a natural interest, and then in college, it was interesting to me. So I took a introduction to psychology class. I didn't know yet when I first started. I knew how I felt about people, but I wasn't connecting that to a career idea yet. And so freshman year of college, I took an introduction to psychology class and was really interested in it, and kind of had the light bulb idea, like, oh, maybe being a therapist would be cool. And so I majored in psychology. I didn't know yet about the world of social work.
Okay.
I had some of the maybe stereotypical visions of social work, where, very kind of like in the trenches, traditional welfare kind of work, which obviously is extraordinarily valuable, but that I wanted to be in the psychological side of things. But as I was exploring options, I had a mentor who enlightened me, or educated me on how vast social work actually is and how much opportunity there is there.
Okay.
And I feel really lucky to have been made aware of that, because it was a very enlightening curriculum. That program, exposed me to a lot of realities of the world that I would not have otherwise maybe really gotten a grasp on. So, and I learned, more and more therapists have a background in social work, and it's less and less PhD in psychology as maybe at one point in time was.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, that's become a little more like a research degree, and I wasn't interested in research.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, so it's more social work program is more of a clinical program.
Okay.
So that's how I got interested in it, and I knew as I was going through my social work program, because it's a very applicable degree in a lot of different avenues you can go there. I knew I wanted to be doing psychotherapy, so I kind of targeted my classes and my internships around that to hopefully set me up to be here now.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So one thing that you mentioned briefly is that you started working somewhere, and now you have your own practice, which I think is super cool. One, just because congratulations. Two, just because obviously women being able to build their own business is something that is super cool and super inspiring. So can you share a little bit about that journey with us?
Yeah, so not to attribute my success to a man, but I did get very lucky as starting out. And usually when people first graduate with an MSW, they're probably going to find themselves in, a nonprofit sector, an agency, a community mental health, hospitals. And that's during that period of time, you have a provisional license, you have to build up hours under a supervisor. And then as people get experience, maybe they end up going into private practice. I got very lucky and had a connection to a former colleague of mine, knew that this practice was looking for another therapist. And the person who ran the practice was looking for someone who, I think kind of was open to being trained and supervised. So it worked out really well, and he had a very well established practice, and so there was, there was no issue around getting new clients because enough people were calling into the practice, and they would get scheduled with me, and so I was able to build this really solid caseload while having someone, to go to for supervision and for training and guidance. And so I was there for like 8 years or so. And so that was a great amount of time to, again, build this solid foundation of clients. And then it got to a point where I just started feeling more competent and less like I needed that supervision. So I just, at that point being ready to do things more independently and autonomously, and I really, really enjoyed also kind of, the administrative side of things, like diversifying my tasks, and I just feel like having my own practice, creates what feels to me like a more intimate space with my clients. It just makes it feel even more personal in a way, obviously with professional boundaries, but and I feel very lucky to be in this position.
And her office actually has a tea and coffee bar now, so really it's the little things for sure.
Thank you for that appreciation.
So I wanted to, I wanted you guys to kind of see just a little bit about the evolution of just her background interests, and then kind of go into what is CBT and how can it be used.
Okay, so in a nutshell, CBT obviously stands for cognitive behavioral therapy, and so which stems from cognitive and behavioral theories. So the cognitive part of it is, we all have perceptions about anything that's going on. There's the facts, and then there's the way we perceive the facts and the way we interpret the facts. And very unconsciously, that affects a lot of how we feel and act and subsequent thoughts. And these are things that we learn to do from an early age. We are impressionable and we're social creatures, and so no matter what, we're going to be affected by our environments and our experiences and our relationships and upbringing and et cetera, et cetera. So we're gonna have these ways that we learn to think about ourselves and others and the world, and without knowing it, it happens unconsciously and automatically. So if somebody walks by me, and if two people walk by me and they're laughing, without me even realizing it, I might then be suddenly feeling really bad. And if I step back and pay close attention, I can maybe see I'm thinking they're laughing at me. Or no one likes me, I'm unlikable. But all these things happen on an unconscious level, and maybe that's related to ways that I've learned to think about myself from past experiences. So the cognitive part of it is first and foremost bringing awareness to what are those perceptions, what are the themes underlying the perceptions. And when we can extract those themes, then, and this is where I would say something that I like people to know about CBT, is that people think it ignores your past, but it doesn't. You know, we're maybe not psychoanalyzing the past in the way that some other more traditional approaches might do, but it doesn't ignore your past. It very much takes into account, yeah, here's where you learned to do this. I mean, it's not always that clear, but it's, yeah, and here's maybe some things that you've experienced or some pain that you've suffered and wounds that you carry around. So a lot of people think CBT is too surface level, but it can go very deep. You just go very deep from this specific perspective. Like, where did you learn how did you internalize these very deep-seated beliefs that are now being projected onto these specific situations in the form of maybe more surfaced thoughts. So, from our thoughts come emotions, and from our emotions come behaviors. So, and all of those things can affect each other. We can feel a certain way, and that might lead us to think and act a certain way. We can act a certain way, and that might lead to certain thoughts and emotions. So the behavioral part of it is recognizing, so if two people walk by me and I assume they're laughing at me, I might then put my head down, go to school or work the next day, not talk to anybody, don't reach out to anybody, even though I might want to talk, because I'm thinking, no one likes me. Of course, this is an exaggerated example, but now my behaviors are going to reinforce the thoughts I had in the first place. Because if I'm withdrawing and I'm isolating, people aren't going to reach out to me. There's a connectivity among all things, and people are going to pick up on that and maybe assume I don't want them to talk to me. And then my thoughts are going to say, see, no one likes you. So I like the behavioral part of it, because sometimes thoughts are obviously very difficult to deal with because they do happen very automatically, and they can have, we can go down that spiral really quickly. So I like that sometimes the behaviors can be maybe an easier thing to implement. Like, okay, you might be thinking that no one likes you and you might be feeling like crap, but let's pull your head up and make eye contact and reach out to somebody. And, worst case scenario, yeah, like they don't respond and you still feel rejected, and, we'll deal with that then. But it's not a one-off behavior.
Right.
But, best case scenario, it breaks that pattern. They respond well, you get a different feedback, and that can change the thoughts. And vice versa, you can start thinking, all right, maybe those people were laughing at me, again, worst case scenario, and I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't need to take that personally. Maybe they're projecting their schemas onto me. So that's an overview of CBT. It's identifying patterns of thinking and behavior and restructuring them in the ways that they are currently distorted and problematic.
I like that. That was a really good summary. Because one thing that I don't think that CBT, I never talked to Lauren and she's like, tell me about the worst thing that happened in your past and how it's affecting you today. But those things do affect you, and it's more, what do you have going on today? And then figuring out how, okay, maybe these things that have happened in the past have triggered where you are today, and then making that connection there.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that you can understand it's not all, it's not all your fault, it's not all someone else's fault. It's, these things happened, a combination of lots of different variables could have led to the way that it's affecting you now. And you can have compassion for yourself in that, yeah, like as a child, we don't have control over a lot of things. We aren't aware of someone else's behavior being problematic, and so it can be internalized negatively. So to have compassion around that, and at the end of the day, you're the one responsible for doing something with that. Maybe something horrible did happen that was someone else's wrongdoing. So again, you can appreciate that and have grace around that for yourself, and also take control of what you have control over now.
I like that. It's very good, because I feel like it's very empowering, and then there's also like a level of accountability that you really bring, where it's like, okay, here's the things that you did or have control over, and then also taking control over maybe the things that have happened to you that you didn't have control over, but how they're impacting you and how you allow it to impact your mind and your future relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you do a very good job of that, specifically.
All right, so I wanted to talk about what mental illnesses benefit from CBT.
Well, I mean, I think traditionally, or not traditionally, but like probably in a lot of places, it would say that anxiety disorders respond really well to CBT, because anxiety can involve, it can involve a lot of avoidant behaviors. It can involve a lot of neurotic compulsive behaviors, and it's like really clear how this feedback loop happens of how those behaviors, and a behavior can even be ruminating, worrying in a ruminative way. And so also anxiety can, a strength of anxiety sometimes is that it is a little more of an active, like stimulating on a physiological level. And so sometimes people struggling with anxiety can have a little more motivation to do the thing that will help. And usually a lot of people with anxiety are desperate to get out of their mind, get out of their worry, and get away from the nervousness. So sometimes just the way it can be more hands-on and directive and proactive can fit well with certain anxiety disorders. It is very relevant to depression as well. Something that's difficult with depression is that, again, physiologically, there can be lows, low energy, low motivation, low interest. And so with depression, sometimes like the behavioral stuff, it kind of comes down to a lot of times the behavioral work of do these things that are good for you even when you don't feel like it. And that is very powerful, but unfortunately it doesn't get as, sometimes people will be in a depressive state and they'll be doing those things for a long time, and it takes a lot of effort to do that when you're depressed, and there's not really quick results. Not that there's quick sustainable results with anxiety, but there can sometimes be maybe a little bit quicker, like, okay, I can see how this works. Like the depressive energy can just be so self-maintaining. However, with depression, I think what is very powerful, and when it comes to CBT, is the self-loathing that can come with depression, and the very, very negative and very distorted self-talk and self-image. A lot of people with depression start thinking, I have nothing to offer, people would be better off without me, what's the point in doing any of these things, I'm still going to feel badly. So I do think that the cognitive side of it, and again those core beliefs, is really important when it comes to depression. CBT can essentially apply to most things except issues where a person is not aware of their own, maybe lacks insight or lacks awareness or the ability to be aware. So, certain like psychotic disorders, it's not going to be as helpful. Certain kind of the brain disorders, like ADHD, behavioral therapy straight up on its own is very effective. But sometimes like the impulse control with ADHD and just the lack of ability to stimulate one's brain, kind of thinking about it and changing their thoughts about things might not be as attainable, but behaviorally it's very effective. And then again, certain personality disorders, it's not going to be helpful because the issue is a lack of insight into one's own role. So to sum up, regardless of the disorder, people who are motivated and have insight and self-awareness, CBT is going to be very effective.
Very nice. So one thing that I've struggled with pretty much always is anxiety. And so one cool thing that I think you've helped me to realize is the difference between physical anxiety, mental anxiety, and then how the two play together. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the mind and body are obviously very connected. And this is where kind of a subset of CBT, or from CBT came mindfulness, which is obviously a bit of a buzzword, but it is, again, very, very relevant treatment where it's centered in awareness and non-judgmental awareness. And so it's still related to, the perceptions you're having of the physical sensations. And so if I wake up, our bodies are extraordinarily complex, more so than our minds can really understand. And so if I wake up and I have, tightness in my chest, that could be a million and one things. But if my mind attaches to it and I create thought around it and I'm like, oh, I must be nervous about something. And then I start looking for things to be nervous about, and I'm sure I can find something. And then now my mind is nervous. Now my body's going to react to that and get more nervous. And so mindfulness can be very helpful with not labeling or not judging. And that's kind of an essential part of it. And because the physiological anxiety, sometimes it can be, part of a chemical imbalance. If it's pervasive, debilitating physiological nervousness, then that in its own, if somebody has kind of mastered not making any meaning about it, can obviously still be there to an uncomfortable level, and that might be a matter of, again, balancing the chemicals. But a lot of times it can also be you can intervene by taking that step back and observing, this is going on in my body, and not attaching to it, not making meaning of it, and refocusing elsewhere. And then, the mental anxiety is, of course, the worry, rumination, avoidance, and people can certainly experience that without feeling it physically. But a lot of times, I'm sure if everybody paid close enough attention, there would be something in our bodies reacting to that mental stress, and vice versa.
That's very true. So whenever we first started working together, you have taught me a lot about negative thinking traps, like thinking spirals, how the brain picks one thing and then attaches it to a ton of other things in the world of anxiety, and that's been something that's helped me a ton. And so I think that's something that's pretty common, that if you struggle with anxiety, I think pretty much everybody has those negative thinking spirals or traps to some extent. Can you share a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, and I think you'll get those I observe that to the greatest degree in my abstract thinkers, which is inherently a strength to be able to think abstractly, think outside the box, connect things that aren't, and fathom things that are only possible through your mind and aren't, necessarily tangible, factual, here and now kinds of things. That's such a strength, and there's so much beauty and contribution that can come out of that. And those are my clients who I see, suffering the most. If they are anxiety sufferers and they've got that abstract kind of web-like thinking, they might start connecting things that aren't connected, or getting further into the thought spirals because it's, well, this leads to this and this leads to this. The more concrete people obviously still suffer, just manifest differently, and both have strengths and limitations. So going down this, I think it's the world of possibility is so dangerous for anxiety because it's endless, it's boundless, and a person's mind can just spiral. And a lot of times, that involves awareness. Everything starts with awareness, but recognizing, here I go again, and catching it. Because 9 times out of 10, when people actually experience the things they're afraid of, they step up to the plate and they problem solve, and they're not thinking and wondering, they're just doing. And it's a lot less scary than when they're just imagining the possibilities. Because with that space comes a lot of uncertainty, all of the what ifs you can possibly think of, and also just you're getting away from yourself when you're going there. Whereas in reality, people are pretty resilient and pretty adaptable and can take charge when the situation calls for it.
That's very true. So I always heard the saying that if you worry, you experience twice, like the pain of it. And the other thing that's like always like super fucked up about my anxieties is they never come true. Like whatever I'm worried about, that doesn't happen. But then like this other thing that I never could have seen, that happened, and I wasn't prepared for that, but I never could have been, but I was worried about this thing instead.
Yeah, and the worst thing that came up, you probably handled just fine.
Well, debatable. Yes, but I definitely think that that's a big way that it manifests for me. So I think that was something that like straight from the beginning, I was like, okay, so I have this weird thing that happens, how do I stop it? So that's something that you've helped me a lot with, is being able to identify it. And then you also are very good about, like, you point out the strengths behind mental illness and like why you have anxiety and like why it exists. And how it can actually have areas that it benefits you and not just ways where it is negative.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I like to, like an example of a deeper function of CBT, because some of the things you shared about those thought spirals, sometimes people, when it comes to rumination, maybe a more surfaced cognitive intervention might be like, okay, let's challenge that single thought. Let's restructure that single thought. What's the evidence for this? What's the evidence against this? Is there any other possibility? That is a very great skill to have. But when people ruminate, the thoughts are, that's just one out of thousands of thoughts. And so then unfortunately, you're like challenging thought with more thought, or you're trying to get out of thought with more thought, and it doesn't stop there. Okay, solve that one, and now there's another one. So I still think it's within the realm of CBT to address the whole process of rumination, of like, okay, this is a thought process, and I'm not going to engage it. I mean, that in itself is challenging your cognitive like structure or the cognitive patterns, and that's what CBT is. It's identifying these patterns of thinking, and so it's just a more abstract and a more underlying way to say, here's this whole pattern, and the pattern is this process of rumination. I'm just gonna put all of these thoughts over here, and I'm not gonna engage. They're there. I can't control that. I'm gonna bring my focus back to my breath, or back to the road if I'm driving, or back to the podcast that I'm listening to. So I think that's a very important component of CBT, that again, going back to that, like, it's not just let's target these thoughts on the surface, it's let's get underneath this. And it's very important with the thought spirals and the process that exists around that.
That's very true. So what would you say is if somebody was coming to you and they were brand new and they've never done therapy before and they have no idea what it's about, what would you say to them, or what would you say to expect for like their first time seeing you or their first time in therapy?
Yeah, so that first session is, it's always about meeting the client where they are, but that first session especially, because if it's somebody especially if somebody who's not familiar with therapy and doesn't know what it entails, then like that first session is the relationship and the rapport, and just creating like a comfortable environment as much as I can. Obviously, what I have to offer is not going to be the right environment for everyone, but I would say it really depends on the person in terms of what like that first session would look like, because some people just need to come in and spill it all out, because some people have been holding it all in or not knowing what to do with it, and like finally have the space to just let it all out. And then some people are very nervous and they don't know what to say or where to start. And so if that's the case, so first of all, it's just gauging where they are, like on that continuum. And if it's a case where somebody is very nervous and don't even know where to start, I might be just asking general questions. There's general like assessment guidelines for any therapist in terms of just gathering information, like what's your family like, what's your social life like, what was growing up like for you, what are your interests, what are your fears, family history of psychiatric issues. So if it's someone who doesn't know what to expect and they don't know where to start, it would be a much more general getting to know you conversation, and like not okay, we're gonna dive into the deep dark issues today. But then there's those people who come in and they're ready, they've had enough of what they're dealing with, and they're like, I'm here for you to tell me like what I need to do to make this better. So we might start honing in on the specific issues that day. So it really just depends on where that other person is at.
That's good. I like how you started with meeting people where they're at, because I think that's very important. That I think that some people, they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. What if we can't come up with anything to talk about for an hour? Like, what if like I go in there and I just talk for the whole hour and like everything in between? So that's really cool. Yeah.
And in the end, there's ideally a balance between, there's some people who, they need to if every session needs to be a vent session, I have to trust they're getting something out of that, and I can't control that. I think in a perfect scenario, there might be a balance of again, more kind of a back and forth collaboration. But again, that might not be what certain people need at certain points in time. So just depends.
I like that. That's great. So I wanted to share some of the things that I like about CBT and how it has helped me. So I would say it has helped me really a lot with anxiety the most, I would say. And so being able to accept that I have anxiety, know that it's like okay to have, how I can deal with it when it comes up in different areas of my life, having different kind of like tools in your toolbox to be able to use them. And I also really appreciate about you that you always help people come to their own decisions through like validation and acceptance. Like you're always very validating with, even if I'm like, man, you will not believe what's going on this week. Like you're always very like non-judgmental, very validating. I think that's very important as well. Is I think a lot of people probably don't go to therapy because they're like, oh my gosh, what is this person going to think or say or whatever. So I really like that your just way of interacting with people is very just non-judgmental, very accepting, very validating. And so I think that's something that you do really well, and just the way that you work and what you offer.
Thank you.
Of course. So I wanted to have you share one boring fact before we wrap up. So I saw this thing where people ask people like, tell me an interesting fact about you, and everybody hates it. So now there's this new thing of like, tell me a boring fact. Like I put my left sock on first, or like whatever it is.
I love that. Oh, I'm gonna probably make this more complicated, and I'm gonna overthink this.
Do you want me to tell you mine?
Yeah.
Okay, so mine is I never eat pasta with sauce.
Oh.
Yeah, so like if I go out like to Olive Garden, I literally will get like no sauce, extra Parmesan cheese.
That is interesting. Well, I guess it's supposed to be boring. But I find it interesting. Okay, my boring fact is, this is so boring, and I was just reflecting on it the other day. Mostly, besides coffee, the only like drink I drink is water.
Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one.
It's really boring.
Yep. Straight water, coffee gal, I like it.
Yeah. So
I like it.
And I want to expand on that, but I'm trying to keep it as boring as possible.
Of course. I mean, now you got your tea option, so
That's true.
Add a little tea in there if you wanted to.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I wanted you to share how people can find you, book you, and then anything else that you wanted to add.
Yeah, thanks for that promotional opportunity. I have a website. It's www.laurenatkinsonlcsw.com. I also, if you Google my name, Lauren Atkinson in Greensboro, there's a Psychology Today page, which gives my number and email and my office location and all that, and a little more information about me and my office. That's about it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this episode, sharing about CBT. Hopefully this was interesting, insightful, and if you guys are interested in CBT, definitely reach out to Lauren. I will link her website in the show notes as well. And thanks so much for tuning in.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Madison.
That was fun.